Good dawning to thee, friends, and welcome to episode 12b of Sonnet Sisters. I'm Jennifer, and in this episode I'll be going through an analysis of Shakespeare's sonnet number 12. Welcome to yet another procreation or fair lord sonnet. This is a group of poems, the first 1 to 17, all convincing a young man to get married and have children. Now, I've said it before, and I will say it again. This poem has so much going on in it. So much so that I'm just going to go through line by line and not only talk about the definitions of particular words that I found tricky the first time round, as I normally do, but I'm also going to go into some of the analysis line by line because there is so much going on in this. As I said initially in the blind reading for this poem, this is a much more gentler, sort of poetic, romantic with a small r, approach to trying to convince someone to have children. And we see that coming through very clearly as I start to talk more and more about the poem.
What is the meaning of this?
So, line by line. When I do count the clock that tells the time. All right, this sets off the tone for the entire sonnet. The whole thing is about time and counting it and the fact that it keeps moving on and you can't stop it. That is a recurring theme in this particular sonnet. Now, in Shakespeare's time, people didn't have wristwatches, they didn't even have pocket watches because they didn't start to come into being until roughly the mid to late 1600s, which was after Shakespeare's time. The way that most people knew what time it was from the main village clock, and sometimes some other small buildings would have clocks inside them as well, but mainly the village clock would be what told everybody the time, and literally telling them the time because it would chime on the hour every hour how many hours in the day it was. It's 5 o'clock, there'd be 5 chimes, 10 o'clock, 10 chimes, etc. The idea of telling the time is kind of a literal, almost personification of the clock because the clock makes a noise, which is how you know what the time is. So you're listening for it and the clock is telling you what the time is with each chime. This first line, when I do count the clock that tells the time, it most probably means sitting there listening and going, oh, 1, 2, 3, blah, blah, blah. Oh God, it's 11 o'clock. I should get home before I get into trouble. There is also the possibility that it could be looking at a clock, looking at the second hand, or watching the hours go by. So kind of counting the hours tick past. It could be that, but I think it's most likely more the first one. But it could be a little bit of both, perhaps. And see the brave day sunk in hideous night. This again has 2 potential meanings. Brave to us generally means standing up against something that you're afraid of. So going to do something scary despite the fact that you are afraid. Now, hideous, it's possible that there's an antithesis going on here with hideous. So hideous most likely comes from the Old French hisde, which means dread. So then you have bravery against fear in the same line. The brave day sunk in the hideous, dreaded, fearful night. So that's one thing going on there. There's also the fact that brave can be a visual thing. It can be sort of glowing, majestic, something that looks great. It's like, oh, this brave face. Or Miranda at the end of The Tempest says, oh, brave new world, saying it's wonderful, it's full of wonderment. And see the brave day sunk in hideous night, hideous obviously meaning ugly. So then you have glorious, majestic versus ugly, you know, beautiful and ugly. So there's both of those things going on at the same time there in that line. And we've only got to line 2, folks. It's crazy. When I behold the violet past prime. There's a lot of mentions of colour in this poem, and violet is the first one. He could have chosen any kind of greenery, any kind of flower that fit the iambic pattern, but he chose violet, which to me is a very vibrant, vivid colour to plonk into the middle of this poem. So it's really continuing this very kind of visceral, very, very vivid imagery. And sable curls all silvered o'er with white. So this is talking about, sable means dark brown or close to black. So sable curls, a bit like mine, I've probably got sable curls. Sable curls all silvered over with white, so dark hair turning to white. So again, we've just had violet and then we've got sable, silvered, white. Again, very visual images coming to mind, deliberately kind of painting these ideas across the listener's mind or the reader's mind. When lofty trees I see barren of leaves. So when very tall trees are completely bare, don't have any leaves on them, and it's clearly a deliberate choice that he's used the word barren. Again, he could have used another word, empty or anything like that. Barren relates directly to infertility, someone who cannot have children. A barren desert, there's nothing living there at all. So that's a very deliberate choice, again, linking back with this idea of bearing children. Which erst from heat did canopy the herd. Erst just means before or previously. So which previously kind of shielded the herd of animals from the sun and protected them by giving them shade. And that's interesting as well, from heat did canopy the herd. In those two lines, actually, lines 5 and 6, there's a lot of E sound coming through. And I don't necessarily know what that means. I haven't fully pared that down, but it's just interesting to me. And like I say, this is a very specifically written poem that uses a lot of different literary devices, and it feels good in the mouth to say this one particularly, and interesting to hear, beautiful to hear, I would say even. When lofty trees I see barren of leaves, E, which erst from heat, E, did canopy the herd. There's a lot of E, so it's got this kind of flow to it. And summer's green, all girded up in sheaves. So we've got another bright colour there, summer's green. Girded just means encircle. So girded up in sheaves, sheaves like sheaves of wheat, sheaves of barley. So it's just a big bundle of harvest crops, basically, with a great big rope or whatever it was that was tied around them to bundle them up and keep them together, encircling them. Now this is an interesting line. Born on the bier with white and bristly beard. So the white and bristly beard is referring to something about the way that the barley and wheat looks when it's kind of got little bits sticking out all over the place. It looks a bit like a bristly beard when it was all tied up and laid down flat. And a bier was a cart that transported coffins. So there's a very deliberate personification of the crops as if they were a person, as if they were an old man's body being carted off to a funeral. It's really quite depressing. But yeah, that's a really interesting line, and I think really visually and metaphorically interesting and beautiful. Now that was the first 8 lines. So we've got an 8 and 6 divide in this particular one, because that's very clearly one big section of just listing all the different ways that nature decays. Then it moves on to the point of the poem, I suppose. Then of thy beauty do I question make. So then I start to think about your beauty and think about the fact that it won't last forever. That thou among the wastes of time must go. I love that phrase, wastes of time. It really gives the impression that life is pointless. So when I say I love that, I don't mean that I like thinking about the fact that life is pointless. I just think it's such a powerful phrase, the wastes of time, that you live your life and then you just get thrown out into this abyss of meaningless time where you're just floating, you're just there, you just waste like rubbish thrown away. Ooh, it's terrifying, but great, just in 3 words, wastes of time. Since sweets and beauties do themselves forsake. Now, forsake is a word that we're all going to have to get used to because Shakespeare uses it a lot. It just means to abandon or renounce, or to kind of give something up, usually giving up something good. So sweets forsaking themselves, they're forsaking themselves, which is because they're sweet and beautiful. They are good, so they're giving up this good thing. So it's like sweet and beautiful things and people will eventually give up their beauty, give up their sweetness, and start to give in to the inevitable decline from nature and from time. Really, I don't know, I find that really beautiful as well. And die as fast as they see others grow. So this brings back this idea of time and the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun into hideous night. So you'll die as quickly as new things grow, which then has the implication that these new things that have grown, they're going to quickly die as something new comes up, and it's just this constant circle and constant movement of things coming into being and disappearing, coming into being and disappearing, which again has this kind of rhythmic thing to it, echoing this idea of time ticking on. And nothing 'gainst time's scythe can make defence. Time here with a capital, time being this personification like you see in a lot of pictures of time or death, a hooded figure or a sort of skeleton holding a great big scythe, a great big, not razor, but it's like knife, curved, sharp knife that would be used to cut down crops practically, but in this idea of death, being used to cut down people when their time is up. Save breed to brave him when he takes thee hence. Again, we've got some more alliteration there, breed and brave. It feels really great to say it. I recommend saying this one out loud and really relishing each word because it's a really cool one to say. Save breed to brave him when he takes thee hence. So here again we have the word brave coming back again from the beginning, which was used to describe the sun, which represents this idea of glory, majesty, and kind of new hope because it's rising out of the darkness. So it's the idea that breeding will have that same majesty and that same idea of hope as the sun. You could even say sun, the same idea as the sun, like a son, if you have a son, a child. There's potential implied, that's really interesting. I would love it if this is true, if it's deliberate implied pun. So he hasn't even put the pun in there, but it's an implied pun going, oh, remember when I talked about the sun? And now I'm suggesting you have a son. Like you have to create the pun yourself. I really hope that that was deliberate and that's true. But as soon as you say it out loud, you start to go, oh yeah, son, son. I think that's really cool. So save breed to brave him when he takes thee hence. Again, tying those words together so closely, breed to brave, and deliberately having that link of the alliteration of br between them, links the breeding to the brave, saying, breeding is your hope. This is what will defy death. Although I say defy death, there's a really kind of hopeless tone to this whole poem, which I'll go into a little bit later, but that one last line is the only bit of hope we get in the whole poem. It's the only positivity, the only possibility of overcoming death or overcoming time's movement. So that is your only hope, just to breed, to have some kids. That's the only small thing that could possibly do anything against this ticking of time. Speaking of the ticking of time and going a bit deeper into that, this poem structurally is very deliberately laid out to be a driving force that feels a bit like a ticking clock, or feels like the idea of time moving forwards and pushing you forwards. In that there are no feminine endings at the end of any lines, there are no truckies in the middle, everything is very steady, completely on the iambic rhythm every time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, ba-dum, 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 all the way through from beginning to end, very steady, which echoes this feeling of a ticking clock, like I say, and things pushing forwards and time pushing you on towards death, towards old age, and there being nothing you can do about it. If you're speaking it, there's not much time to stop. There's no opportunities where you might flip something or mess up the rhythm, which he sometimes does deliberately in other sonnets. This is very much on the beat all the time, and it means you can't really stop when you're saying it. There's no places where it would make sense for you to stop and take a pause. It's just kind of got to keep going on. I say that, it doesn't mean I won't pause when I do the reading. I'm going to try not to. So there's that. There's also the fact that this is sonnet number 12. And that is said to be a deliberate choice with this sonnet as well, because there are 12 hours in the day, 12 hours on a clock face. So again, it's another way of solidifying and supporting this idea of time being all-encompassing. Do you know, I just thought about that when I talk about girdled and the encircling. That's again like a clock. There's so much in here. Unbelievable. I literally just thought of that now. It's all about time, and yeah, it's sonnet number 12. Again, being like time. So I talked a little bit about the fact that that last line is the only hope in this poem. And when you've had that driving force, that steadiness come all the way, and I was saying you feel like you can't take a breath, you have to keep going with the rhythm, keep letting the rhythm drive you forwards until you get to the end of the poem. And then there's just this tiny glimmer of hope at the end, just a little slither. And the fact that it's just this little tiny thing, again, for me, feeds into this idea of us being a tiny existence in the wastes of time, in the great universe. of your snippet of a life, that the poem is like bum, 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 time's coming, time's coming, time's going to get you, there's no escape, no escape, no escape. And that thematically, that last line at the end is the only positivity and potential to overcome that. But it's so short and so tiny that it does feel like this little gasp for air at the end. Yeah, really interesting. Moving on then to the tone of this sonnet. For me, it's really beautifully vivid and full of these wonderful images. It's like a big painting in front of your eyes. And so it feels very, very poetic. I know that sounds silly to say because it is a poem, but it feels like it has those qualities of specifically using particular literary techniques and structures. It's been very carefully thought about, this sonnet, and very carefully and lovingly, I would say, stitched together. But at the same time, it's so depressing. The idea that time is forever moving and you cannot escape it. Perhaps if you have a child, it kind of will stop, but also he's already talked about dying as soon as something else pops up. So the very fact that you're talking about breeding to have children, it already feels hopeless because you've talked about, things disappearing. So like that, your child is going to have the same problem. They're going to have time having a go at them, forcing them onwards, and they're going to have kids if they want to stop that. And the cycle is just never ending and it feels relentless. So this idea of beautiful imagery and beautiful poetics matched with, or put against, I should say, working together, I don't know, whichever, with a really strong sense of your own mortality and relentless difficulties, I suppose, and the hopelessness of life, the futility of life, for me, conjured up the idea of the kind of goth movement, particularly in music around the 70s, 80s, I guess more 80s. And bands like The Cure, who have these wonderful, sweeping, beautiful sounds going on in the music, but the words are usually quite cynical and to do with the fact that things are futile and this idea of your own mortality and the relentlessness of life and that kind of thing. So in an ideal world, I would just call up The Cure, not like this because no one uses phones like this. Call up The Cure, Robert Smith. Hey mate, you want to record this poem, like one of your own songs, put it to music? Yeah, sweet, great, send it to me by Saturday, thanks, boop. That's not going to happen. Although if you're watching Robert Smith, please do that, it would make me so happy. So the next thing I could do was to try and get some people together who I know who could play in a band and write the song myself. I do not have time for that. So I also had this idea of perhaps embodying that same idea, wearing all black and being a very serious poet at a poetry open mic night. That was the other setting I thought about. But then I like the idea, that does still sort of distance it and make it very much a poem. And though I've said this does feel more poemy than a lot of the others and less conversational or less potentially conversational, more sort of sweeping in imagery, I would like to make it a bit more personal if I can, a bit more relatable. And for me, the thing that really stands out, the fact that this is to do with a ticking clock, the relentlessness of time moving you forwards, and the fact there's nothing you can do about it. As a woman, I can relate to that very clearly, especially again because this is about breeding. Now, these poems were originally written for a man to try and convince this man to have children, so it didn't have this particular dash of colouring on it. It didn't have this intention that I'm thinking about of a woman only having so many years within which she can have children. Once all my eggs are gone, that's it. And I don't know when that's going to be, but time is a ticking. That's something that gets said to women a lot, unfortunately. They get reminded that time is a ticking. And if you want to have kids, better do it soon. So that for me is where I feel the strongest bond to making it relatable and making it relevant to someone modern day, perhaps, and people my age. So I imagine someone just like myself, basically, talking to themselves, so that instead of this being speaking to another person, convincing them, that it's this person realising their own mortality and facing up to it and going, hey, come on, maybe it's time to do that thing that I haven't done yet. You know, time's ticking. I'm not getting any younger. The inevitable will happen. Perhaps I should have kids, and having that conversation with yourself. That's the idea that I really like at the moment. The only other thing that I would have liked to have done, again, if I had time, but I don't, is to dive into that imagery and really show all of those things, to show the crops on the bier and to show, the violet going past its prime. Because this feels like such a beautifully painted poem, then I would want to show that very vividly and visually. But again, I don't have time to do that. So it's likely that I will go down the route of talking to myself, giving myself a pep talk, or not really a pep talk, but admitting the truth of life to myself, that kind of thing. That's probably where I'm going to go. But what would you do with this poem? Which route would you take it? Would you take it one of the ones I've mentioned? Would you do something completely different? Do you feel like there's a particular area where I've missed the mark, something I haven't talked about that you're like, but this is so important in this poem? Let me know in the comments what you think, and any other discoveries that you've had with this particular sonnet or with any of the sonnets. Feel free to go and comment on those. Perhaps you'd like to film your own performance of the sonnet and send it in to us. We would love that, so feel free to do that. We'd love to see them. But for now, you can see Anna doing her blind reading of sonnet number 13 on Monday. And you can see my performance of this poem, hopefully on Saturday, potentially Sunday, depending on various timings, because it's a difficult week this week. Everything's quite squeezed in. So it might be Sunday when this gets released. But either way, you'll be able to see this sonnet in performance at the weekend. All right, well, until then, see thee anon.
What was he on about? That body, mister, come figure it out with the sonnet sister.
As I said in the initial blind reading for this poem, excuse me.